Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our 11:11. We appreciate you tuning in and being a part of our talk. And I hope you got a little flavor last week as we just discussed what are we doing this for and how are we doing that. And of course, our guest this week and our guest last week is General Manager of Johnny Amoki in Salem, David Vanderpool. And David, would you like to do a little recap of what we talked about last week just to kind of get us going?
I can.
Yep. Thank you, Dave.
Yep, and thanks again for having me back. I guess you didn't get rid of me after the first shot, so I guess I must have done something right. But appreciate you all tuning in, and it is good to be here. And maybe I'll again remind everybody that even though I'm from John Amoki and Son in Salem, I'm really representing the entire funeral service industry. And that's important because all the information is just general information, and you can use this anywhere. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter your economic status. It doesn't matter your age. You can use this with us, or with Lots, or with Serenity, anywhere. In Florida, it doesn't matter. So I always like to share that. We kicked things off last week with the topic, why even go there in the first place? And we sort of centered around the idea that really nobody wants to talk about this. And, it's not a fun topic. It's sometimes is sad. It can be intimidating. And so why in the world would you go there in the first place? Well, we kind of squashed that whole mentality, and we focused on 3 reasons to go there in the first place. And just very quickly, I'll recap. We talked about it being a stewardship issue, that we all have a responsibility for ourselves to make decisions so that nobody else is doing it for us. We talked about ownership, meaning that that we're in charge of what our wishes and our preferences are, and we ought to be entitled to decide what it is that we want or what it is that we don't want. And then we finished up with talking about the peace of mind that really is what our goal is. In the end, after we've thought about this, and after we've made decisions, and after we've shared our ideas with maybe a funeral home or our family or friends, the goal is to have a peace of mind that all of these things are sort of taken care of. So that sort of is the recap.
And I really enjoyed and I kind of earmarked a little bit the peace of mind thing, because over the years, being a pastor, I have had to be a referee at some of the families planning for their loved ones' homegoing. And of course, Dave shared that he had been a part of that situation also. But the main thing is that we need to take care of this so there won't be any problems or won't cause any problems in the planning of the homegoing of yourself, and allow someone to just be able to not have to make those decisions. And that's so important. So we appreciate that, Dave. That was really good. And today we're going to talk about the end-of-life planning, and Dave's going to get into it in many different directions. So, Dave, I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you take off.
Okay, very good. So the title that I put with this session is The Decision of Disposition. And, when we start to think about prearranging or end-of-life care, what is done with our bodies after we've passed away, it really can be kind of overwhelming. And as a funeral director, sometimes I'm almost intimidated to sit with the family and start the process, particularly if they've not thought of any of this, because it's a stressful time. And so as we kind of move into sort of the nuts and bolts of this series, I thought it might be important to just kind of simplify everything and start from, and I labeled this from the ground up, sort of literally, if we could throw a little bit of humor in there, and just talk about the 3 main options for disposition, because there really are only 3, and we all have to choose one of these 3. So I want to share those things with us today. I'll sort of define a little bit of each one and expound on some things too. And Pastor Gary, just as last week, feel free to interrupt me and answer or ask some questions as well. When we think about the simplification of it, it really is important, because it pulls it down to where we can just take things one at a time. And the very first thing that I thought that I would share is just a very simple definition of the word disposition. And there's two slants on this word that I wanted to share. The first is kind of a raw definition. It's just simply the disposal or discarding of something, sort of to get rid of something. And you know, if we kind of peel away all of the sugar coating of death, really what we are doing is we are disposing or we're discarding of a body. Now, we're not doing that disrespectfully, but at the same time, it would be disrespectful if we just left the body be where it passed away and then that was it. So there is a very respectful discarding or a disposal. We've got to get rid of that body for obvious reasons. So that's the first part of a simple definition of disposition. But the second part is what sort of gives it maybe a little bit more of a positive feeling, and that is this: to place or distribute or to arrange, especially in an orderly way. So if we take a body to a cemetery, let's say, we are placing that body in that cemetery in an orderly way. If we take cremated remains to the ocean, let's say, and we scatter the cremated remains there, we're distributing those remains in a very respectful and an orderly way. So as we think about disposition and we think about the decision of disposition, we sort of have to mix both of those definitions in there together. So to get to the core of this, the three different options for disposition, I'll name them, and then I'd like to go back and talk about them one at a time. Obviously, there's traditional, what we call traditional. The second is cremation, and the third is body donation. Those are really the only three options that we have as human beings. We've got to decide to go down the path of one of those three options. So traditional, which is kind of funny to use that word today because it's becoming not so traditional. Cremation, and we'll get to that in a moment, cremation is really becoming the new norm, and even statistically, and I'll share that in just a moment. But when we think about tradition, ground burial or full body interment into a cemetery or a place of perpetuity, that still is what we sort of consider as traditional. So definition of that is where we take the full body and we take the body to a cemetery for interment, which is burial in the ground. It could be entombment, which is placing the body inside of a crypt, like a mausoleum. And then there are also still, it's not very common, but still every once in a while there is a full body burial at sea. Those are really the only three options that you have to keep the body intact as far as the traditional sense goes. When you think about the requirements, and I'll just kind of go through this fairly quickly, for interment into a cemetery, you have to have a casket or some type of a container, and it can be a lot of different kinds, but some type of container. Most cemeteries, not all, but most cemeteries require what's called an outer burial container, which is a container that's either made out of steel or out of concrete that surrounds the casket, and it's used to provide strength in the ground so that the grave does not cave in from maybe a vault truck or a backhoe and things like that. And then, of course, you need a space. You need some type of property in the ground for the burial. For entombment, for sure, casket. Some cemeteries limit that choice to metal only. They do not allow wood in crypts because the wood can break down. And since this is above ground, there can be issues with that. Not all cemeteries are like that, but sometimes they are. And then, of course, you need a crypt. You need some type of a space, again, not in the ground, but something above ground, a mausoleum crypt to be able to have the body inside of there.
Dave, is crypts only at perpetual cemeteries, or have you ever seen one at cemeteries that aren't? And the definition of perpetual is the state takes care of it, right?
Yeah, the state or it's the ownership, could be shareholders, it could be the cemetery themselves. It means it's forever care. It means somebody's going to take care of the lawn, and somebody's going to take care of just everything about the cemetery. It's an interesting question. I don't know that I have ever been in a private cemetery, and by private I mean maybe a church or maybe somebody's private property where there has been above ground crypts. I don't know that I've ever seen that. Many places, even here locally, they have that. But I don't know that I've seen that in any private case. Could be, but I just don't know for sure. Good question, though, Pastor Gary. The third option with that full body disposition is at sea. And again, just very quickly, if you are interested in burial at sea, you have to be contracted with some type of a vessel. If you're military, it would be through the Navy. That's the only branch of service that does burial at sea. You have to be a veteran to go that way, or a descendant or a dependent of the veteran. If you're a civilian, you can still be buried at sea. You just have to seek out some type of a private vessel company to be able to do that. Requirements: a special kind of casket. You can't put anything in the water that is plastic or is metal. It has to be something that will degrade over time. Has to be at least 3 nautical miles away from the shore, and statistically, I think at least 600 feet deep. So those are some things to go on as far as the burial at sea. I thought I would touch on green burial as well, because that's something that kind of pops up a little bit. Green burial is also still ground burial, full body, but there oftentimes is no casket, or if there is, it's maybe something that's made out of cardboard, or maybe wicker, something that is going to easily decompose in the ground. The body is not embalmed. The body is in a shroud. It's very natural. The idea is that the body rapidly decomposes and sort of becomes part of the earth, and we name that green burial. It's
That's
not
back in the Western days.
It kind of is, yeah. Not super popular yet, but the yet is the key word, because it's definitely going to come about. So that's the traditional option for disposition. The second one that I'll share quickly is about cremation. And cremation is, again, even statistically, becoming sort of the new tradition. But cremation, by definition, is where the entire body is placed into some type of a retort with fire and total, complete incineration. What is left is basically skeletal remains, and then those remains are then further processed to yield what we know as cremated remains. And the requirements for that are 2 different containers. Obviously, there is a container for the cremated remains after the cremation, so some type of a box. It can be something very simple, lots of options, and I guess we'll talk more about preferences and wishes and things like that in the next session when we talk about some of those. But the other thing, the other item that is required, at least in the state of Virginia, is what's called an alternative container. And this is in the Code of Virginia. Every body that's going to be cremated has to be placed in some type of alternative container. Now, there are options without 2. Minimally, again with the state code, is a cardboard container. And I'm talking about a cardboard container that's as big as the body. The body's placed in there. There are some requirements with that, and so that's what the body is actually cremated inside of. Obviously, if you were going to have a viewing of the body prior to cremation, you probably wouldn't use a cardboard container, but that is the minimum requirement, and we use that quite a bit. So some requirements, some further requirements for cremation. The family does have to authorize, even if the person who passed away has expressed his or her wishes that they want to be cremated, the family still has to provide an authorization for that. There is also a visual identification that's required. That is also a law in Virginia. After the death occurs, a family member or a representative of the family must view either the body physically and visually, or can be a photo of the decedent. It can't be an identification where you all bring a picture of the loved one and we decide, yes, this is that person. It has to be of the decedent, the decedent's body. There is a cremation permit that we get from the medical examiner's office. In the public eye, the medical examiner system investigates unnatural deaths, so homicides, suicides, unattended deaths, those types of things. But there is a wedge of their responsibility that says that it is okay to, again, dispose or discard of a body, because there's nothing left after that. We can't go back to a cemetery and disinter. So the medical examiner has to say it's okay. And then just a couple other little things. You can't have a pacemaker. We remove the pacemaker prior to the cremation. You can't have any other explosive device. And I know some people chuckle and say, well, why would that matter? Well, we don't want to cause damage to the walls of the crematory, so in that case it would. But it is okay if you have metal implants or ceramic implants, hip replacements, stents, all of those things. All crematories recycle all that metal. And so those things are left over. So that's the cremation part. And then simply just a couple of more moments about anatomical donation, and not to be confused with tissue donation. These are two different things. Tissue donation would be more of like an organ donor. Maybe you would donate your eyes, or you would donate possibly the brain, or just other organs. It can be also skin, long bones, those kinds of tissues. But anatomical donation is where the entire body is donated, we say donated to science. And it is for research, and it's for education. It could be for dental needs, learn how to pull teeth or to provide or perform root canals. It could be for surgical things. So I know that if I'm going to go and have a surgery, I would much rather have had the doctor practice on maybe a dead human than for me to be the very first one. So it's an educational way for that. When I went through embalming school, we learned off of dead people, which I know is kind of silly, but I mean, there were people who were donated to science, and those were the folks that we were able to practice with.
Are they called cadavers?
Yeah, cadaver. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Good question. And then the last use that I think is really interesting, and we don't talk about it a lot because it's kind of, I guess, on the taboo side, is the forensic side. And I love to use the example of where maybe you have a cadaver dog, let's say, that's trained to go and find a body in the woods. Well, the way that they learn how to do that is because someone has donated their body with the purpose of placing it in the woods in a very protected area, and then that dog is trained to find that body. And so there's a lot of crime scene investigation uses that can be carried out with body donation as well. As far as merchandise goes, there is no requirement outside of what is provided for by anatomical donation. And I know this session is not about the financial part of it. That's a couple more weeks. But there is no cost at all whatsoever to the family for anatomical donation. The end result is cremation, but there's no cost at all. And then some of the requirements for anatomical donation, generally speaking, no recent surgeries. No open wounds, no communicable diseases. The body cannot have had an autopsy or have any type of mutilation or advanced decomposition. You cannot have already done an organ donation. They want the entire body. The body has to have been refrigerated within 4 hours of the death, and you also cannot have a body that's severely obese. They'll cross that out too.
So an amputee could not do that?
Now, an amputee is a little bit different.
Okay.
An amputee is a little bit different. Where I'm talking about is, let's say that there is a body organ donation and they want to donate their skin for maybe people who are burn victims in a house fire. That body would not then be able to be donated to science because of the fact that would increase the chance of a more rapid decomposition. So that's where that would be. So what I thought was interesting is I was kind of putting some of these thoughts together last night. I just thought for myself, well, I wonder what the national disposition percentages are. Now, this didn't show about body donation, but it did talk about the traditional versus the cremation. In 2021, according to the National Funeral Directors Association, 37% of people were traditionally buried, 37%, and 58% were cremated. Now, I know that doesn't equal 100, so you got to give or take a little bit, and there's maybe some other things that fell in there with body donation and so forth. But here's the interesting thing. For 2040, okay, so we're talking 18 years from now, the expected rate or percentage for cremation is 78%. 78% of folks will be cremated versus 16% only for traditional burial. So it, like I said, it is rapidly increasing as far as the new tradition. So those are the that's the information that I felt like I wanted to share in this decision of disposition. Everybody has to make that choice. Everybody has got to figure out which of those options you can have. You can still have a service for all of them. Some obviously will be with the body and some will not be with the body. We'll talk more about the wishes and preferences next week, and I believe one of my colleagues, Jonathan Stillwell, is going to be here in my place and share that. But it all starts here in the simplification. We have got to dispose of the body in an orderly way and in a respectful way, but we do our society, we have to dispose or rid or discard of that dead human being.
So locally, what are you seeing is the norm here locally?
It's a good question. Last year, our funeral home, we were probably about 55% cremation. And so we're not really that far away from the national average. I will say that when I started in funeral service 20 years ago, our cremation rate was probably about 20% of what we did. So in 20 years, it has more than doubled. And so the projection for 2040 is probably not too far off.
Wow. Well, you know, our time's up, but I just wanted to share with you again that if you want to come, we have some people here today that's going to ask some questions after we get off air. You're more than welcome. And like I say, next week, another funeral director will be here, Jonathan, and we'll be talking about our third subject. But we want to thank David, and he'll be back for some later on 11/11s, but we want to thank Dave and his time to come here and do this and just give us the great, and I'm amazed at all the stuff that goes into this, and I know you are too, just hearing this. It's really opened my mind up to a lot of things. I just know now I'm not going to be buried at sea, so I appreciate that. So I appreciate you tuning in today, and again, thank you, Dave, and we appreciate each and everything that you do here on the campus, and just continue your thoughts and just continue to think about your family and what you want, and just communicate those wants to your family so that they can be an easy transition for them and they don't have to guess at what you would want. So keep that in mind, and we thank you for tuning in.
Thank you very much.